My new book, Pillars for Life, A Guide to Spiritual Ethics and Practice, is now out and available for you to read and purchase. You can check out our website, willowhealing.org, to find a link, or you can find it on Amazon. We look forward to getting your feedback, and if you love it, please leave a review and share with your friends. Now it's time for the show. Welcome to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We are so excited to have you joining us on this journey where we explore different ways to empower your soul, whether it's healing in your kitchen or all the way up in the corporate world. Come with us as we look into different ways to heal your mind, body, and soul. Hey everyone, it's Catherine from Willow Healing, and I'm here with Dr. Nigel Brayer. So Dr. Brayer has 28 years of practicing integrative health with expertise in helping women navigate and manage urinary incontinence and process of perimenopause and menopause. So I am excited to have this conversation as he is also known as the natural bladder doctor. So a big welcome to the show, and thank you for giving me your time and sharing your knowledge.
Well, thanks for the invitation, Catherine. I look forward to a conversation. This is very exciting.
So what inspired you to actually get into women's health and become the bladder doctor?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially as I'm a man and a lot of women are like, hey, what's a fella doing specializing in women's bladder health, especially such a vulnerable topic as that and a personal topic. And to be honest, I didn't do it by or on purpose, and it wasn't some deep, dying desire to be a doctor of women's health issue or women's bladder issues. So I have this saying is, I usually just follow breadcrumbs. So, the universe or God leads me, and I tend to follow. And I was kind of led in this direction because I guess being a male, I really like to solve problems and I like to help people. Mm-hmm. And so God put a big problem right in my face is several years ago, my wife, after our last child, she started experiencing incontinence. Now I'm condensing the story rather short for time constraints, but it took a very long time for me to even discover that was happening. And so she really just started avoiding certain things that we enjoyed doing as a family. She really started making kind of excuses to not do certain things. And I thought, well, that's strange. And I started to think, well, a new child, or she's tired, or we thought maybe she had postpartum depression. And none of those things are really the case. But it came after like a long discussion one evening that she was losing her ability to hold her bladder and it was worsening. And so there's a lot that goes into that, but it kind of frustrated me and saddened me. It's like, well, gosh, I've been in the health field for many, many years. Why couldn't she share that with her husband, right? We live together, we do everything together. So I thought to myself, wow, this is a really heavy topic for people, even in a personal relationship. So again, once I had learned that, then I went through my usual resources. I'm like, okay, well, I looked up what's the primary treatment for this, and pelvic floor therapy is usually the first that pops up, which is a physical therapy modality, or they increase strength of the pelvis and the sphincters, etc. So looking at it from a purely mechanical muscle standpoint is kind of the typical management. So I referred her some physical therapists. She went through the protocols that they offer. It took about 2 months or so. And she had very, very modest improvement, maybe 20, 30% max. And so, of course, that was a little disheartening. So we went to the next step and she saw her gynecologist to make sure, everything physiologically was intact, and as it was. And so the next conversation was medication and surgery. And she's like, well, that's not a viable option, somebody who's in their early 40s. And so she mostly felt just disheartened and discouraged to a point where she was just going to say, hey, this is just how it is. She started talking to her girlfriends, and lo and behold, they had similar problems. So she thought, oh, this is just normal. And being in the healthcare field, that's just not acceptable to me because the body's design, I've seen so much amazing things over my lifetime in practice. The body's design is to heal. Yes. And so It just is. So if we think back into just science and biology, is every 7 years, every cell in your body repairs and replaces itself, including your bones. So a lot of people don't know that. They think, well, the bones don't ever change. Everything is changing in our body. So the $1 million question is, why isn't it getting better and better every 7 years? Because we're replacing. It's like a Xerox copy for those, who have copier experience, because I don't think that many people copy things anymore. But
I understand.
The more so the more you copy something, the less efficient that copy becomes. So, and it's purely because of accumulation from toxicity and our modern world and stress. So, long story short is that just wasn't acceptable to me. So I started really digging deep into the female bladder function, the urinary function, the neurology of the bladder and such, because there wasn't really any options available. And I thought to myself, well, surely there's got to be somebody much brighter than I that's figured this out. And I had not found anything. So as I did more and more research and looked into the bladder and all of the tissues and how they work and all that stuff, but what was really intriguing and what kind of pushed me to create a program that I started doing in my office with my female patients, and then later, brought it into an at-home course, is when I looked at what's called the neurology. So neurology is really just studying the nervous system. So I'm trained as a chiropractor, so we are very aware of how the nervous system controls everything and how that affects its function. But when we looked even deeper at the bladder, and most importantly, what's called the sphincter. So for your listeners, the bladder is like a balloon, if they don't already know this, with a straw stuck at the bottom of it. Okay, so the balloon holds the urine. The straw is called the urethra, and the urethra exits. Now, in a male, there's two different valves. They're called sphincters. So if you imagine the straw pushed into the balloon or pushed into where you blow the balloon up, the valve on the bladder is called the internal sphincter, which is the valve. And then there's one on the outside where the urine exits called the external sphincter. Well, with a lady, is the sphincter is about, or the valve is about an inch long. So men have two, one at the balloon, one on the outside. Women essentially have one. But here's what's really intriguing, is that valve is 70% what's called unconscious or autonomically controlled. So think about that for a second. So you and I are sitting here, and if we get excited, our heart rate goes up. If we calm, then our heart rate goes down. Our blood vessels constrict and open as needed for blood to flow to our brain. None of that is going on consciously for either of us. So our bladder is also autonomically controlled 70%. The other 30% is what's called conscious. So conscious control is, I'm going to flex my arm moves closer to my head, and then I relax it. I have full control over that. What's happening in the autonomic is you don't have full control over that. And because that sphincter is 70% controlled autonomically, its real strength comes from what's called the vagal or the sympathetic tone or parasympathetic tone, which means this, is all of our life events are giving our body a general tone. So I'll diverge here a little bit. So the number one cause of death in most first world nations are heart disease, right? So heart disease isn't a heart problem, it's a stress problem.
Yeah.
And so the heart just so happens to be the product, which, shortens lives. So you imagine long-term high stress in a modern world. You've got, type A lifestyle. You're going, you're pushing, you're striving, you're achieving, you're running from this kid event to that kid event. You're doing this, you're doing that, you're saying yes to everything. So over many, many years, that affects your overall neurologic tone in your body. Not only your heart, not only your blood vessels, but also your bladder. So full circle, full circle, what we're saying is, hey, any bladder treatment has been purely based upon the physical, consciously controlled function. Well, it only makes sense that we're missing most of the boat. So let's turn that kind of topic around here. So I started looking into acupuncture. I'm an acupuncturist also, but I started looking into acupuncture and what's called neurosomatic retraining, where you train the autonomic nervous system so it reacts with the body differently. So I introduced a protocol that I started doing in my office, and it had extremely high success. And of course, Brandy, or my wife, was the first one to kind of go through this process. And as we evolved, we found that these women that I treated, that 80 to 90% of them had full resolution of these ongoing bladder issues. And even the ones who had very severe trauma, like some of the ladies who had what's called a prolapsed bladder, which means the bladder has lost its integrity and now it starts pushing out through the vaginal canal or the uterus pushing through, is even those people had up to a 50% improvement. So it all came from really rebuilding and resetting the autonomic nervous system, as well as working on the tissues of the pelvis. So when we did that consistently over time, is we had amazing results. And of course, that was a huge helper for my wife, but also for our family in general. So pretty exciting stuff.
It's so funny you say that. So after I had my son, um, I was petrified to sneeze, right? Because that is when I find I had the least control, and I remember being horrified. I'll share this, I don't care anymore. But, I remember being horrified because I was about to get in the shower, and I did this massive sneeze, and I peed on the floor. And my husband's like,
Sure.
"Did you just pee?" And I'm like, "Yep. I don't know what, because,
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
just had a baby, breastfeeding and everything." But it was funny because then when I reduced all my chronic stress and stepped out of the high stress job I was in, it's not an issue anymore. And I didn't even think about it until you just said that, with the connections with the neurological symptoms and the stress and how it puts stress on the bladder. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense. It's because when you can get that cortisol under control too, which can be really hard as a mum. I'm not going to deny that,
Sure.
because life
Yeah,
happens. Especially if, like you said, if you've got multiple children, you're trying to get them everywhere and get everything happening, and but it makes so much sense, because when you can rebalance your cortisol levels at the same time, as well as doing the extra work, then it makes sense that it rebalances. Whereas, like you said, and it's so funny because when I was doing Pilates, and when I was pregnant, and they said, well, they've just shown that just doing the pelvic exercises alone is not going to completely help your bladder issues. So I was like, oh, so what do we do? And they had no idea. So, and then here I meet you.
pretty exciting, isn't it? How it all intertwines.
Yes, yes. And it makes so much sense.
So, so what's really cool, Catherine, is what we're talking about right now is the bladder, and everything affects everything. So this conversation could just as easily be, how do I manage my chronic gastrointestinal problems? How do I manage my heart issues? So they're different specifics, but a healthy body is a healthy functioning body.
Yeah.
And if the bladder's not functioning efficiently, it's because something else is going on. So I'm not downplaying that the bladder is important, because obviously if we can't hold our urine, that poses many problems in our daily life. But the key to most of this is to start building these little things in place that start undoing what we've created. So most of us are living, consciously or unconsciously, doesn't matter, but we're living a product of our last so many years.
Yeah.
And so patients will come to me with a plethora of different problems as though that's what's ruining their life. And that's not necessarily ruining their life. I call it their $1 million problem. So if you can't stand because you're in chronic pain, well, that's your $1 million problem. If you can't drive for more than a minute because you're afraid you're going to leak, that's your $1 million problem. So those are the drivers. But the underlying health issue is usually deeper than that. And I don't share that to overwhelm people. I share it to kind of inspire people, because a lot of patients will come in and say, hey, I have bladder issues, and oh, by the way, I have chronic indigestion, or I keep having to take a proton pump inhibitor, which is like an antacid medication, as though all of these are separate battles that you have to face. And the issue is they're not separate battles. There are a whole bunch of different symptoms of an ongoing underlying problem. And the best place to start it is always from the neurologic standpoint. So I think of it like you and I are on this computer right now. If if it just shuts down, I'm going to check power supply first. That just makes sense. I'm not going to try to go deep into the coding of software to figure it out. It's more likely the power source. We're going to start there first. And the body's very similar. We have to start with the biggest, most likely thing first. And what I find intriguing about the bladder and about common modern medicine is everything becomes extremely what's called myopic, where you look so closely under a microscope that you miss the 30,000 foot view that nobody seems to be picking up on. And bladder issues are such an example, or at least in my experience, such a huge example of that. So
yeah, and I love that you brought up that there's always something underneath, because from my point of view, working energetically, like as an intuitive healer, I'll always be like, okay, what's going on? All right, let's actually keep pulling that and see what the emotion is underneath, or see what the cause was. And, you know, sometimes it can be a memory that was triggered from when you were, 3 or 4, that is then presenting as, like you said, a bladder issue, or it's presenting as a shoulder problem, or it's presenting as a sore knee. And people are like, what? And it's like, well, because your body stores everything, and like you said, I love that you said, people walk in with this $1 million problem, but they're carrying this body that they've been carrying around, building up. And it's only when you get to that point of tragedy where the symptoms are no longer able to be dealt with, that then you go, oh, maybe I actually need to look into this, rather than something's not in alignment with my body and it doesn't feel right. Maybe I should go have a look of what's going on there.
And I'm 100% on board with that, especially when you think of, and not to go too down the rabbit hole, but everything is really energetic. When somebody has a physical trauma, that physical trauma is an energetic change. And it has a physiological function. So you even think about like physical trauma tearing tissue. Let's look at childbirth. Childbirth is definitely a traumatic event. Now, let's say you add in a C-section. That's even a more traumatic event. So all of those things are really blocking the functional. And I know a lot of people get pushed away from the word energy, but when we think about even a nerve impulse is just energy. So it doesn't have to be an esoteric discussion. It's really like we have tiny little forms of communication, kind of like a fiber optics line is pushing, light through a cable. Your body's pushing electrons through something that communicates. And if that's blocked, and that's really the premise behind Chinese medicine, is that blockage left to morph turns into all sorts of different ails, crisis, and disease. So yeah.
And I love to, like, a lot of people don't realize, like, meridian lines, which I call the emotional pathways in the body, because when they're not flowing and they're blocked, that's when your organs start to show up as well, saying, hey, you're not listening to this, it's not showing you. And I'm really grateful to live in the time that we're living in at the moment, because there's more and more research supporting, the energy field, and showing that your body can do all these things, and that there is energy connections, and I love what's coming out of the Heart Math Institute. I'm like, oh, these guys are amazing, because it's so, finally someone has figured out a way to measure these things that we've all kind of known intuitively, or even what's been shown in centuries of acupuncture and centuries of Chinese medicine. And finally it's like, oh, we have some evidence now, so we can believe it. But moving with that.
But common sense and intuition would tell us that it's all true long before that time.
Exactly. Yeah. And so what pulled you to actually, I love that you're a chiropractor and an acupuncturist. What pulled you to do both together?
So I'll say just personally, I'm ever learning. So I found that once I learn something, there's just this constant curiosity. I'm just intrigued. At first, I just love helping people and interacting with people, because as I've discovered more personally and intellectually, I've just found that people keep showing up with things that are have been unsolvable for them. So I guess part of it is just this insatiable desire to learn more and to grow and expand as a person. But that also takes you on a path of healing. So as a chiropractor, again, I've been in practice for 28, almost 29 years, and you see amazing things. But when you start noticing, and this is what I've seen in my practice over the years, is if I would have somewhere to send a person to get the help that I think they would need, I would have done so. But they didn't exist.
Yeah.
So you would treat, and then you'd have a patient with this issue that was seemingly unresolvable. So I would start looking and developing and researching. And then that would lead me to the next step, like I have to take and do more because I can't send them to somebody I have confidence that they're going to help them with.
Yeah.
And that's also why I'm a functional medicine practitioner is you have to realize that the GI tract and how we absorb things and our gut lining and our flora, they affect our brain, they affect our liver. And if I had say, hey, I want you to go see this person, they're going to help you out, but that doesn't exist. So I had to become that.
Yeah.
And so not that I know everything by any means, but I've just been compelled to take on those things, even though I have to be honest, sometimes I didn't want to. It was easier not to.
Yeah, again, those breadcrumbs, right? Like you talked about at the start, like picking up those breadcrumbs and keep following them to help you solve the problem. But I love that you went to the extremes of like, I'm going to just train in that. That's missing. I'm not going to search for people anymore. I'm going to become that. I love it.
Well, it's pretty cool, but I've always said that sometimes insatiable curiosity is a curse because you're always learning, you're always building. And I'm like, when will I just be content to just sit and watch football? And the answer is, I don't think I'll ever get there.
No, and you know, it's so funny you bring that up because my husband's very much a big TV person, but I'm a big book reader. And for me to actually sit down and watch a movie and just focus on the movie is really difficult because I'm like, no, I want to be doing something else. But at the same time, it's where you put your focus and attention. So I fully understand why you're like, why don't I just want to sit down and watch the football? Because your soul's like, no, I want to learn more. I'm here to find this quest. We've only got one life. We need to consume everything we possibly can.
Yeah, and I resonate with that statement, which again, sometimes can be a bit of I won't say a curse, but sometimes it can be tiring, shall we say. Yeah.
Exactly. So I imagine you work with women's health. So you've got your urinary issues, but you've got your bladder control. You've got this beautiful now natural process, which is up to 90% effective, which is amazing because I know so many people who they try all these different things. I know this one person, this client's mum I had, she went to like something and it like kind of did all the pelvic things like really quickly, like a shaky chair or something. And I was like, did it work? And she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not enough for me to go try that kind of thing, right? And then you also do the perimenopause and the menopause. So how did that, and then, well, that makes sense to me how it weaves, but how did that journey happen for you?
Well, sure. So it goes back to, so now we look into the nerves, we look into the bladder function, but now we have to look, and I'm going to digress a little bit. So there's three main causers of stress in all of our lives. So there's physical stressors. That's going to be our anatomy, how the bony parts fit together, our posture, our traumas, etc. Then there's nutritional, chemical, hormonal stressors. So, of course, the food that we take into our body, the exposures that we have, the scents, the exhaust, the chemicals, the plastics, the water supply, all these things, they're creating taxation of our body. They're drawing resources from us. And then we have mental and emotional stress. So if we're looking just, and we'll talk about the bladder journey for a second, is most current bladder treatment is entirely physically based. That's why it's so limited in its outcomes. Okay, it's not worthless, but it's limited because it's only hitting one component of the stress triangle, and that's the physical. Okay, well, if we want to address any issue to the next level, we have to look at what's the next form of stress. Well, nutritional, chemical, and hormonal. Well, as you know, hormones have a dramatic influence on all tissues, not just the uterus, not just the ovaries, all tissue. And you ask any menstruating female, and she'll tell you through the month she feels different.
Yeah.
She doesn't know why, but, well, she might consciously know why, but the hormones are influencing her biology. Sometimes she feels puffy, sometimes she's sensitive, sometimes she's tender, sometimes she's grumpy. Well, how come? Well, that's all hormone.
Yeah.
And you can't talk yourself out of a hormone because they're affecting the DNA of your cells as they circulate. So what happens is as those hormones change, it is logical to say all the tissue function changes. So if we want to really address the bladder, we have to understand that if the hormone balance is off, or what we call xenoestrogens, or as things in modern life start to influence and act like hormones, they're going to affect the body or the bladder's ability to function. So we also have to look into, okay, what's affecting the liver? Remember, when there's liver congestion, then we're going to have more what are called xenoestrogens, which are going to affect the tissue. And progesterone in a female is kind of like a male's testosterone. They give a female energy. They increase metabolism, where estrogen is a holder on. It makes tissue thicker. It holds on, kind of like, the uterus every month builds up a lining in the prospect that an egg might be implanted. So estrogen causes tissues to swell and become thicker. Well, imagine you have a bladder and you have a bladder wall that's stronger and thicker, or what's called the urethral wall, which is the tube, is thicker. It's going to have better integrity. Now imagine, just as we age, our skin gets thinner, our lips get smaller because we're losing collagen in tissue. Well, we're losing that collagen in tissue in the bladder and the urethra also. So if you don't address that component, then we're only looking at it from a physical standpoint. And that leads to the next part of the stress triangle is the mental emotional stress.
Yeah.
So, and that's where the neurosomatic retraining comes in, because is if your mind, and you're very familiar with this, Catherine, I'm sure, is if the mind's not on board, or you have these deep unconscious patterns that are kind of sabotaging you from any sort of big change, those have to be at least teased out, or at least, I'll say, brought to the light so that they can be healed. So it's the bladder's the issue, but you have all these three stressors that are affecting all of us all the time. Does that make sense?
100%. And I like, Dr. Nigel, that you brought in all those components, because it's never just the one thing. It's like very rare. And even, from my standpoint, people are like, oh, but what if you break a bone? I'm like, well, there's actually an energetic thing behind that too. There's like normally this underlying reason or emotional reason, like why that ended up happening. And when you unpack it, it's very amazing how accurate it actually is, so,
sure.
Which is very cool. But yeah, and I think too, a lot of people don't actually think about, what we put in our body does have that impact on our hormones and that chemical balance and how everything actually aligns and that sort of thing. And there's so many more studies coming out with like neuroplastics, microplastics, sorry, they're such a big thing, especially how they impact hormones and how they're impacting, especially for men as well, like impacting their sperm counts and the sterility and all these big things. And that again is just one component of the triangle, but thinking about it all together is really important, really.
So my experience too, Catherine, is people hear this and they get extremely overwhelmed because they're like, where do I start? What do I do?
Yeah.
And that's reasonable, but I guess part of my job, and I guess jobs of people in the health care field at all, is to give people simple step-by-step paths, because it's really not as big a deal as you think, because you didn't get here, even though we're here in this moment right now, and that's all we have, and I get that, but you had billions of other moments that led up to this. And so the key to changing it is to take away the pressure of like, oh my God, I'm deer in the headlights, I don't know what to do, is just start with something so simple. And that's why I always start people with just dietary changes first. And I don't even have them change their diet. I just have them start paying attention to what crosses their lips.
Yeah.
So people people ask me, okay, well, I want to do your bladder ironclad protocol. I'm like, great, sign up, we'll get started. Or they'll say, I'm not ready to start that yet, but I want to do something. I'll say, great, buy a notebook, or I'm not a computery guy, but buy a notebook, start writing down everything that crosses your lips. Don't even try to change it. Just write it down, and then write down and rate your day on a 10 scale, 10 being amazing, 0 being horrible, and rate your day from a mood standpoint. And the reason I have people do this is if you start paying attention to first what crosses your lips, and then second, your general mood, and pick a number to place. And at the end of the week, add up the number. So imagine you have 70, that would be the most amazing week of your life. And you start paying attention, and you'll see, just through percolation, you'll start seeing patterns emerge. You'll say, oh my gosh, why am I eating this at this time? Or why do I do this? And why do I feel this way? And so when you ask the questions, I'm a big believer in this, when you ask the questions, the answers start to come.
Yeah.
And so that's so simple. And again, sometimes we mistake simple for ineffective. So people are so used to saying, okay, well, I went to this doctor and I paid them huge amounts of money, and they're in this crystal palace at the top of this building, and only the top people of the world go there. They must have the answers, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the neighbor down the street is really the one who has the answer. So if you just start by writing down everything you eat and drink, and then rating your mood somewhere along a scale, in the few weeks to come, you'll start to recognize these patterns, and it's a super easy change. Now, a lot of people also, they think about that little exercise and they go, oh, well, I'm afraid to look at what I eat. I'm going to feel so guilty. And so I encourage them. I say, hey, imagine you're a researcher or you're helping your best friend, and you're just getting information. You don't even have to change it. You're just getting data. So once you kind of take it as a little bit of an adventure, it's like, hey, I'm just learning something new about myself, and it's kind of an adventure. In a week, when you sit down and peruse over that data, you're going to be like, wow, why am I falling asleep at 2 p.m? Could it be that big bowl of pasta that I had for lunch? Or why am I craving chocolate at 8 o'clock at night? Oh, because, I'm depressed and I'm down. Or, you see how these things just start to evolve.
Yeah, and it's so serendipitous because a few months ago, I actually interviewed a person, and his name's Ruben Spath, and he created an app that does just what you said. So you actually can put in the food that you want. It's called Macromate, and you put in your food that you want, and you journal. So you journal how you feel each day, and then he's programmed AI to then analyze it for you and actually find the trends that are showing you where your body is not coping with the food that you're eating and what's not. And I love that. I personally like my notebook, but I feel like if you're really overwhelmed by that takes the overwhelm out of it. And to the point you can even take photos of your food and it will analyze it for you. So I love that that's, something that's been created by someone else, but that can also help, everyone listening to this, because sometimes it can get overwhelming, like you said, like, oh my gosh, I've got to document everything I eat. Well, actually, there's things that do it for you now and will help you analyze it too.
Yeah, I'll have to get the name of that app, because I know a lot of my patients would be very into that for sure.
I will hook you up.
Thank you so much.
Ruben will be appreciative to me, I feel. But but that's the cool thing. That's why I do these podcasts too, because I learn stuff and then I can pass that information on to you, and you're teaching me things, which is very cool. And then I can pass that on to people as well. And that, I think, is such a beautiful thing. Like, you had to go fill all those gaps because you couldn't find someone to serve the clients. But if you have all these beautiful connections, like we've created Dr. Nigel, then I know a lot of people in America. So if someone says in America, I've got these issues, I'm like, hey, check out Dr. Nigel. He can help you. So that's, I think, such a beautiful thing with these connections.
Isn't that neat?
Yeah.
I'm in full agreement. It's pretty. There's a great tapestry, which is pretty awesome.
Exactly. So I guess the biggest thing from that was to start with your diet, have a look what's going on, note what you're feeling and start to make a link there. And then then what do people do? Then do they like go, okay, let's come jump on now? Or would you say start to eliminate that? What would you say the next step would be?
So the next step would be simple is, I like analogies. So let's put it this way, is if Catherine, you were counseling me on finances and I was broke, the first thing you'd ask me to do would be to pay attention to where I'm spending my money, right? So I would start paying attention how I'm spending my money, kind of like we're going to pay attention to what we're eating and how we're feeling.
Yeah.
Then when you reflect over it, let's talk the money analogy again, is now when we look back over it and you see, oh, well, hey, Dr. Nigel, you're spending $9 on a cup of coffee every morning. Why don't we start there? That seems pretty clear, right? That's 9 times 7. That's quite a bit of money every week. You've just made yourself some cash. So the same goes with food. As we start looking and seeing, okay, well, gosh, I'm eating my chocolate at 8 o'clock in the evening, and I'm having whatever the things that really blow in your mind. Start there, and whatever we do take away, then add something in its place, because human nature is we always yearn for what we lose, right? Yeah. And if I say, Catherine, you have to stop doing this, you're going to be like, but I can't do that. But if I say, Catherine, you can do this, and then we're going to reduce this, that's a whole different psychological pathway where you're going to be like, hey, I can do that. So if you're doing that for yourself and starting simple, and then you're going to notice your score at the end of the week start to change from one small change, okay? Then the next thing I have people do is to acknowledge the mental component. So I encourage people to set their phone 2 to 3 times a day and simply let it beep. And the reminder is you're going to close your eyes and you're going to take 10 slow breaths. So close the eyes, and I call this the melting wax technique, is visualize that your head is wax. And as you breathe in and then as you breathe out, your shoulders and your neck are just melting. And then you do that. By breath number 4, people are going to feel at least 50% more relaxed. By breath number 10, there will be a notable change. So if you just observe, change one thing that sticks out in your food mood journal each week, just one thing, keep noting, and then the second week start adding in the melting wax technique, is people in about 3 weeks will notice a huge change in just how they feel in general. Now, the bladder itself, they may notice a small change, but these are simple things that you can do right now. All you got to do is just really set a reminder or get an app, as you mentioned, and just start doing it. And in about a month, people will notice huge physical changes and definitely some small bladder changes.
Yeah, and I find it's really important to note too that from being myself in a chronic stress state, when you get to out of that state, it takes a while for all the symptoms to finally sizzle up. So I'm like 2 years out from that state, and I'm still finding stuff coming up to the surface, like especially all the liver detoxing and all those sorts of things. So that's why it's really good to have practitioners you can go to help move that along and clear the energy and shift it. So even when you're in a healthy state, you know, when I say healthy state, but when you're in a state that you feel like that's a really important time to come and do the work too, because then it's going to stop you going back to where it needs to, but also creating a great homeostasis and improving that. So then when your immune system gets attacked again for whatever reason, whether it's stress, hormones, whatever it might be, you have a better base to start with and you're much, much stronger.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with you there. Part of the big deal is, and this is where the health comes from balancing these things out, is we're really trying to build a buffer. Most people are in a chronic crisis mode. Yes. So any new crisis of life, and even, I shouldn't say crisis, when you have enough small things that build up, everything becomes a crisis, right? So the goal is as we start whittling away at these things that are sucking up our energy and causing our body to break down, not only are there less challenges because your body's more equipped to adapt to them, but those are the pathways where diseases come. So disease doesn't ever just happen. So, and I know a lot of people who've had some very serious health issues like cancer and whatnot, and it's hard to hear, so I'm not trying to be non-empathetic, but disease is created. Cancer is created. Now, we don't do it on purpose, but all of these things that have built up for decades, they've whittled our body away. So our strength and integrity is so little that we're the perfect environment for these opportunists to come.
Yeah.
So the key to undoing it is these small little buildups. And that's where forums like this are so important, or having a doctor or a practitioner or anybody to who's been through the paths or knows the paths to lead them through, because this do it alone thing is very challenging. And especially if we don't have the knowledge or understanding or the desire to learn, then it's very disheartening. And then you're in the system.
Exactly.
And once you're in the system, it's really difficult to get out of that system, because it's designed to keep you there, because that's the ideology. So
exactly. And yeah, that's such an important reminder too, because and it's not discouraging people from using that system, but it's also saying there is another option. There is ways that you can look after your health and create a stronger resilience, so that those opportunists don't come in and take over, which is ideally what we all want, right? So yeah. And as we sorry.
No, go ahead. And I'm just saying I agree wholeheartedly to your comment there.
Yeah, and as we finish our time together, Dr. Nigel, I asked the guests that come on the show if there was something they could heal or change in the world, what would it be?
I would say probably the biggest thing is my greatest prayer, I would say, was that people's minds become receptive to the grandeur of the universe. Because we're so busily looking at the tiny little specks of dust called our day-to-day life and our day-to-day thinking, that we rarely look at the grandeur of it all. So I say that with the purpose of giving people encouragement and hope, because once we step outside of our own little selves, because we think that everything is just us, and we look at a bigger picture, we realize we're like one tiny little speck of sand in this monstrous universe. And that universe has been running for millions of years without any of our input. So if we develop our ability to trust that more and listen to our intuition more, our lives will be a lot more joyful.
100%. I so agree. And bringing back that curiosity and wonder, and just, wow, like just, even looking at the stars. How many people actually go and stand outside, if they can, and actually look at the stars and just go, wow, like I still do that, and I'm a big kid, So, and if people want to find you, where can they find you, Dr. Nigel?
Sure, just on my website, Dr. Nigel Brayer, BRAYER.com. And there's a bunch of freebies on there. There's diet things for food choices. There's just a whole plethora of great information. We have an ongoing free webinars on menopause, on our Iron Clad Bladder. We're starting on May 1st, our Iron Clad Bladder 30-day program. That'll be the program that I lead folks through the process of my protocol, how to track it at home. And then we're going to be learning a lot of stuff about hormones and about the GI tract, and just kind of a little bit of what we talked about today, but in a much more structured format where people can really start to own and understand and make some changes. So we're very excited.
Beautiful. And I'll make sure to put all those details in the show notes as well. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. And I know a lot of people would take these golden nuggets and be able to apply them to their lives. So thank you for your wisdom, Dr. Nigel.
Catherine, thanks for this opportunity. I appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We have so much love and gratitude that you have taken the time out of your day to empower you on your healing journey. The views shared by the person being interviewed might not necessarily reflect that of the host and should be used at your own discernment. Trust what resonates for you and follow your heart and soul guidance. If you have any underlying medical conditions or mental health issues, please consult with your healthcare provider before pursuing any of the recommendations. Likewise, you can always contact the person being interviewed to find out more information. This can be found in the show notes. Remember to activate, align, heal, empower, and find love in everything that you do.